On this episode of the show, I have with me Desiree Lee. She's one of the business CTOs at Armis, and we're going to be talking about really security, and we're going to be talking about AI and security and attack surface, and is human nature one of the biggest issues that we see and not necessarily a technology one? And I'm going to dive into a couple of examples that Desiree is going to share with us, and as much as we can fit in, there's a lot to cover. But Desiree, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we start, it'd be great if everyone kind of understood what you guys do at the company, and then we'll dive on in.
Sure. I think if you know Armis, you might know Armis as an IoT or an OT company, because we started out very focused on assets and asset inventory. In the past few years, we have expanded quite a bit in what we sell and what we do, simply because the assets were the foundation for everything else. So now, in addition to the asset inventory, we're building the layers on top of that, including vulnerability and exposure management. We've gotten into the security space with detections and threat intelligence, and we'll move from there.
All right. Well, I'm sure there's a lot there we could just talk about, but this episode in of itself, we're going to be talking a little bit around security. And, just to maybe start the conversation off, you mentioned something interesting, and you said the problem on the defender side is not a technology one. I think that'd be great to kind of hear why that is and your thoughts on that as we dive in.
I think I think there's a lot buried in that statement, but ultimately, there are a lot of places where we could be ahead in security. Faster processes, less manual processes, more automation built in, more tools connecting together seamlessly. And there's technology has gotten better, sure, and especially with AI, it's getting better much faster. But the basic technology to do a lot of this stuff has been around for 10 years. And so we have to ask ourselves, why didn't most organizations make the effort to adopt automation that, if they had it right now, would be helping them in this moment where attackers are leveraging things like AI and defenders are leveraging it to a much lesser degree? And the reason is there's a psychological reason behind it, and I suppose also a business one too. And it's that the defender's organization does not exist to defend. Right. The attacker is a very clean identity. The attacker exists to attack. Everything it puts into research and development is making a better attacking tool. If it was measuring, the criminals were measuring their revenue, it would be because they made a better attacking tool. And on the defending side, we don't exist to defend. We exist to do something as a business. And that something is not related to cybersecurity. And that something is often whatever is revenue producing is often actually put at risk by some of the things that would be beneficial to the cybersecurity side, but actually a direct threat to uptime or reliability. And there's always errors in automation, especially pre-AI, always errors in automation. That means that it's potentially a risk for business continuity. So no, we're not doing that, even though from a security perspective, it would have been nice. That's not a technology problem.
That completely makes sense. And I guess to that point, we've been talking about, I guess, some form of this for a while. I think we've been talking, and early on, you'd see the emails being sent out by security teams. Do not click on these links. We've detected something. Don't do this. And you can hear the requests to champion and help guide users to be aware. That is hard. And I'm going to use a very crude example. And I use this because it really tells a story of how you have to approach things, right? And if you've ever gone to the restroom, there are signs in the restroom legally that says employees must wash hands before they... Somewhere someone thought, we've got to make sure there's a standard and a liability that everybody who works here needs to read that before they go back to work. Right? Not a really great example, but we're talking about sophisticated systems, people with access, emails, a level beyond what we just talked about. From human nature, is there an expectation that human nature lends itself well to helping security teams in the ways they need to be helped? I mean, is that a core issue that is just again, it's not a technology problem, but it's a human nature problem?
I think it is. Now, I've seen some very innovative companies who have leveraged human nature, leveraged psychology to get the organization to help the security teams, right? They have good practices. They're training. This one that I'm thinking of in particular, they put so much effort into their training program. It was like they were producing movies, and they weren't cheesy. They were actually interesting. People loved the program. I can think of one or two of those, but I think in general, yes, the biggest challenge with security teams is their users. And that's just a reality of doing business, because we don't exist to defend. We aren't going into every email interaction thinking, oh, I better double check the email address and see if this one's legitimate. I mean, it's human nature, but it's not a problem. It's just the reality. It's why attackers, when they have access to AI tooling, one of the first use cases for it is to develop better phishing emails, because still the most sure path into an organization, if you're trying to breach an organization, is through a phishing attack against its people.
And I actually love the way you articulated that, because I do feel that there is a component of technology that's evolving, as even if we did educate the community of what to do, what not to do, the pace in which the attackers, which, as you've inclined, their business is the business of attacking, so they're really good at it, they've honed in their skills, it's going to evolve, and the next thing will pop up, and our community has to then go back and educate and hope that users start adopting best practices. When you talk about some of these, you mentioned phishing and AI, as you kind of are seeing the industry and seeing the rise of AI in terms of these attacks, it's becoming very difficult to tell. I think a colleague of mine got a text message, and he swore it sounded like as authentic a text message as it could have been. Smart guy. Thought about responding, and I was like, please don't, just report and delete his junk. And that's maybe something that people need to start hearing about and adjusting to, is just the sophistication of the attackers who are now portraying things that we never had thought possible.
I don't know that the path to success is trying to train users on phishing attempts beyond the baseline, right? I mean, there is standard training, but I'll give you an example, and I wish I could remember the actual bank, but if you Googled bank and deepfake, the story would come up. And this was from maybe a year ago, where a criminal created a deepfake of a CFO and invited the guy who could wire the money to the Zoom call. Now, this guy got an invitation from his CFO. He joins the Zoom call. His CFO is right there. He sees him. He's talking. His lips are moving. He wires the money, because who wouldn't wire the money? This is a preview of what the world is going to look like with well implemented AI. It's not difficult to do this. That criminal was just ahead of their time. We'll see more. Can you vaccinate your user population against that? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, a great example, and B, I agree with you. I don't think you can possibly do that. I guess from the perspective of traditionally the landscape of what you tried to defend against versus where we're at now, the sophistication of attackers using AI, but also with more AI, there's coming more synthetic data, just different amounts of data that is being produced. As a security leader, when you see the explosion of AI and the growth in the attack surface area, what are your thoughts in terms of that being the new area to defend against?
I think it's easy as security leaders, and especially because, who's reading about this new branch of security is CIOs and board members, and they're asking the CISOs, what are we doing about this? But in reality, the best thing that a business can do is to make sure that their basics, their controls that they've agreed to have, are actually implemented, and that their processes, as much as they can, are automated, because the number of exploits, the broad range of attacks we haven't even thought about yet, and the problems that we'll have to address in security with AI, with the availability of tooling, and with the education of attackers is going to skyrocket. And the problem that most enterprises have today is that they can't handle the environment and the threatscape that they already have. Like, this is too much. They can't make sure that all their servers are patched on time. They're having trouble meeting their SLAs for patching critical vulnerabilities on critical servers. These things are they're not housekeeping, but they are basics. They're fundamentals. If you don't have the fundamentals in place, or if your fundamentals take you 90% of your team's capacity to make sure they're covered, you don't have enough capacity to think about what's going to happen tomorrow, or to think about the sexy new branch of security. Like, you've got a problem with the basics. And I see it everywhere. It doesn't matter what the industry is.
Interesting. I guess when you start thinking about, the shift in the usage of AI, obviously attackers are doing that from a perspective of security teams using AI and changing, some of their workflows. Obviously, we know that there seems to never be enough security people on Earth to fill the need. So that's been established. The 2 million or so openings. Is AI going to give a net positive lift to these security teams? Does it end up not simplifying the job? Does it provide some help in terms of the sheer volume, or is there further complexity that we haven't uncovered because the attackers' usage of AI is also increasing in complexity?
No, I think strategic use of AI in tooling is mandatory to approach this next phase of security. There is no way we as humans are bad at processing data at scale, at detecting patterns in large amounts of data. One of my colleagues used to work for a top retailer, and they had 80 terabytes of data. I don't remember if it was a week or if it was a day. They were saving everything. Every log file went into this mound of data, and they hired people who were supposed to try to make meaning from that 80 terabytes that was constantly replacing itself. Now, as humans, or as people writing hard-coded programs to go do that, we're not very good. But when you unleash AI on 80 terabytes of data and you have a rough idea of what you want it to do, it's pretty good at that. It's pretty good at spotting the pattern and finding the needle in the haystack. So I think that AI is mandatory for security teams to embrace if they're going to defend themselves in a world where attackers are already embracing AI. There is no penalty on the attacking side for embracing AI. It's only good things for them, so they will adopt it quickly.
Where are you seeing the attacks going? Where's the next frontier? Because I spoke to one CISO, and he said, they're starting to notice that if they've adopted AI tools, their concern is, what if something gets into their engineering process? Because there's a lot of AI happening, and they're obviously, at this point, your human in the loop might not detect those kind of subtle changes. I mean, that blew me away, because I was like, okay, that's really granular, and that's a new wrinkle. Are there new areas that are going to be opened up because of the way AI is developing on the attacker side?
Absolutely. The way to hack AI, and I want to make a distinction between building with or using chatbots internally, and
Yes.
adopting security tools that work because they've implemented AI effectively. So in one case, you're trusting a vendor. Now, there's still a trust relationship there. You're trusting that the vendor has implemented AI in a secure way. And on the other side, you're saying, I'm going to take my teams and my processes. We don't have a lot of AI security expertise in-house, but we're going to try to do this for speed. Those are not, I wouldn't evaluate those the same. I wouldn't evaluate the risk the same. I wouldn't evaluate the payoff of those things the same. I think there is reason to be cautious when you are getting your teams to build internally, and you have, like, if you're a financial institution, I think the one that I worked at had 12,600, I remember this number, 12,600 custom applications that they built. And when you start incorporating new things, especially something as powerful as AI, without the security expertise, Yeah, there's a huge amount of risk, and the challenge is that that risk can proliferate itself into places that you can't see it and where it's hard to track. So as a CISO, I'd be worried. Yeah.
So as we're starting to see AI proliferate on both sides, right? I think you've kind of outlined that. And it is becoming, I imagine it's going to become even easier for attackers to launch just more attacks because, well, they can replicate faster, they can test faster, a lot of different permutations that they're speeding through. Will that potentially cause companies at different maturity levels that previously were not exposed to attacks? Does that going to potentially increase attacks on companies that otherwise thought they might be a little bit more insulated? They are not a name brand. People don't know them.
I think that actually in that question, and a lot of people think this way, but there's a misunderstanding of how threat actors behave because just because you're not a well-known company, right? You're one of the people I worked with was a chocolatier. They're like, who's going to care about us for a chocolatier? That you're not always the recipient of an attack that was targeted and researched and planned against you. In fact, I think that that's a smaller portion of attacks than we think about. You were basically you're hit by a spray and pray. You know, they're like knocking on every door, 15,000 doors. On which one do I hear a response? That's more like how they're working. And so any company that thought that they were insulated before was just wrong.
So essentially at this point, we should assume, and if you're not assuming that you're liable for an attack because no one knows you, you're dead wrong. And obviously on the flip side to that, if you are in that category of assuming, hey, we're a small time company, who wants to do anything with us? Do these AI tools, will that help those type of companies? Does it still require more sophistication? Is it something they'd have to completely outsource? Because obviously that's probably a fair sized group of companies that might think that way.
I do think that the small and medium business set, which is largely who you're talking about, has struggled to implement real security, right? They don't have the people. Maybe it's one guy. It's somebody who does both their networking and security, plays both roles, didn't go deep into either one. I think that those companies are going to be helped by AI in this way. The vendors who are building the products that they consume are able to do it faster, are able to, with AI, build a user interface that's understandable and accessible, that doesn't take the company who's making it a huge amount of investment that where maybe before they wouldn't have been willing even to put it into a consumer grade product. So I think they're going to benefit from AI on the product design side, that they will get better tools for their market because it costs the companies less to produce high quality security tools for that segment. I don't think that they're going to have to go use a bunch of different tooling. I think the tools will get better in their set.
Yeah, I guess, and I think that's great advice. As you've seen the tooling in AI, change and evolve in the last couple of years, where do you see the biggest lift for security teams? What part, or where does it fit in to provide the efficiency that would be most ideal?
There are a couple places. So one thing, whenever we talk about security, I think the first team that comes to mind is the SOC, right? They're getting the alerts that something might be going on. They're drowning in alerts, frankly. Most of them have way too many to deal with, and they don't know how to prioritize. And when I say they don't know how to prioritize, what I'm saying is they have too much data for a human to make sense of, which should make you think of use case for AI. So I think that AI helps in prioritizing those alerts and bringing to the surface what they actually need to pay attention to. I think that AI helps in the detections pipeline where they might understand that there's a new threat. They might have the detection for that threat, but right now today it takes them 1 to 5 days in order to put that into their environment in such a way that they can actually detect on it if it is in their environment. Like that's a long pipeline today without going into too much detail that AI can help with at multiple steps along the way. One other example, and this one I think has really become popular in the last few years, and I got to see this with Armis because we built one of our own and then tested the market, and then we made an acquisition of the full product. But that's in the vulnerability space. The vulnerability teams, they worked the same way for 20 years. For 20 years, just with a scanner and a spreadsheet. And finally, the technology market started serving them, and they had the same prioritization problem. Mountains of data, 6 million CVEs. Which ones am I supposed to work on? How can I feel like I'm making a dent? And AI using patterns, predictive ownership, prioritizing all these different system inputs into a way that makes sense to the business and is actually connected to risk. Those are AI problems. Those are huge eliminations of redundancy and inefficiency in a process that companies are doing all the time on repeat. Every week, it's Groundhog Day.
I guess if you had, you've covered a lot of ground already, but if you were to look at, you see best practices all across the industry. If there was one thing that you would leave listeners with of thinking about AI, the increased attack surface, the fact that much of what you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily a technology problem. Is there one particular piece of advice that you want people to take away?
Yeah, I'm sure that what your listener wants right now in this moment is something that's related to AI and sounds cool and sounds new. But actually, I would say this. I would say for leveraging any AI tool set that exists today or is to be developed in the future, that what you will need to feed it, you've got to think about what the inputs are to these systems that you're going to have and do have. One of the critical ingredients of that is information about your assets. And this is not a plug for Armis, so much as it is to say that in the last 5 years, most companies built an asset inventory in preparation for this, but they missed a piece. And this goes back to the psychological bit. They have the asset inventory, and I don't think senior leadership is asking the next question, which is, did anyone actually label the criticality to the business of any of those assets? And the answer is no. And yet that single factor should be dictating which alert is responded to first. It should be dictating which system is patched. It should be informing the decisions in your IT and security environment, but it's not there today. And it's not there because although the tech team built an asset inventory, they are not in a position to make a decision for the business about how critical an asset is. So it just sits there. You have this whole pool of data. Lovely. Happy you have an asset inventory. But what you actually want to do to make sure it's useful is to have a mandate from the top down to tag those assets with their business criticality, or you will be missing, and your AI systems that you build in the future will be missing a critical piece of data that they need.
That's fantastic advice. That was great. I wasn't sure what you were going to go to, and I was like, that's actually a gem. So hopefully everyone will appreciate that. And obviously, if somebody does have a follow-up question, they want to understand more, they'd like to just follow up with you. What's a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is best. Send me a message there. I'm pretty easy to find. I don't think there are a lot of Desiree Lees in cybersecurity, so it should be easy.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to include that link. And again, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for sharing with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Desiree covered a lot of ground within security. We did talk about the human psychological side, then we dove into AI and the fact that there are some things that you need to be aware of. You got to pay attention to your data assets, and also, we did talk about the attack surface area and how attackers and defenders are dealing within that space. So please share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.